The crisp edges of the legal document felt strangely foreign in my hands, despite having signed it 6 years ago. The prenuptial agreement. A piece of paper that suddenly felt heavier than a lead coffin, holding the weight of a failed marriage and the storm that was now breaking over my head. I, Ethan, at 32 years old, was getting a divorce. Not because of infidelity or abuse or any dramatic blow-up. No, my story was far less scandalous, far more mundane, and perhaps in its own quiet way, more heartbreaking. I just fell out of love. Sophia and I met when I was 25 and she was 21. She was vibrant, full of life, with an infectious laugh that could light up a room. I was captivated. We dated for about a year, a whirlwind romance fueled by late-night talks, shared dreams of the future, and that intoxicating feeling of finding your person. Marriage felt like the natural next step, the logical conclusion to our perfect beginning. We were young, optimistic, and blind to the subtle ways people change, evolve, or sometimes diverge entirely. The first few years were good, comfortable, happy even. We bought a house, a modest place in the suburbs, the kind with a small yard and the promise of quiet weekends. I was building my career in finance, and while Sophia bounced between different jobs, retail, graphic, design, freelancing, trying to find her footing, I was the primary breadwinner. It felt like a partnership, each contributing in our own way. I handled the bills, the mortgage, the investments. She managed the home, brought creative energy, and was, for a time, my best friend and confidant. The shift was imperceptible at first. Like the slow erosion of a coastline, you don't notice the land disappearing until a large chunk finally gives way. It started about 2 years ago. Our conversations grew shallower. Her dreams seemed to shrink, focusing more on immediate comforts than the big picture we once shared. My ambitions continued to grow, pushing me towards longer hours and future planning that she didn't seem interested in being a part of. We were living parallel lives under the same roof. The intimacy faded, not just physically, but emotionally. The laughter was less frequent, replaced by comfortable silences that eventually became strained ones. I looked at her sometimes, this woman I had vowed to spend my life with, and felt a profound sense of disconnect. The love wasn't just hiding, it had quietly packed its bags and left. There was no other woman, no secret life, just an empty space. Where a deep connection used to be, I tried. God, I tried. I initiated conversations, awkwardly at first, then more earnestly. "Are we okay?" I'd ask, met with shrugs or vague assurances. We went to therapy. It was like pulling teeth. Sophia was resistant, defensive. The therapist would try to guide us. But we were speaking different languages, living in different realities. I talked about feeling distant, about our diverging paths. Sophia talked about feeling lonely, about me working too much. Both true, perhaps, but the core issue, the fundamental loss of connection and love on my end, remained unaddressed. Because how do you fix a feeling that's simply gone? Months turned into seasons. The feeling of living a lie became unbearable. Staying married wasn't noble. It was a slow, mutual suffocation. It wasn't fair to Sophia, who deserved a partner who loved her fully. It wasn't fair to me, living a life devoid of the emotional intimacy I craved. The conclusion, painful as it was, became unavoidable. We needed to end it. Telling her was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I chose a quiet evening, after dinner. I was gentle, choosing my words carefully, emphasizing that it wasn't her fault or my fault, just a tragic outcome of growing in different directions. Her initial reaction was tears, quiet sobs that twisted something in my gut. I offered comfort, tried to explain my feelings without inflicting more pain, but the tears soon dried, replaced by a cold fury I hadn't anticipated. "You want a divorce?" She spat the word like poison. "After 6 years? After my 20s? You just waited until my good years were used up, didn't you?" I recoiled as if she'd struck me. "Sophia, that's not fair. That's not what this is about." "Isn't it? I was 21, Ethan. I put my life on hold for us. I didn't chase my career as hard because I thought we were building a life together. And now you just discard me." Her voice rose, sharp and accusatory. "You wasted my time. You used up my youth only to leave me." The conversation devolved rapidly from there. The pain she felt was real, I knew that. But it was being channeled into a narrative of victimhood and resentment that distorted the truth. She wasn't just hurt. She was angry, and that anger was quickly calcifying into something hard and demanding. "Fine," she said, her voice dangerously calm now. "If you want out, you want out. But you owe me. You owe me for those years. I want half. Half of everything. The house, your retirement, your investments. Everything we built. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Sophia, we have a prenup. Her eyes narrowed. That piece of paper? That doesn't mean anything now. You tricked me. You emotionally conned me into a dead-end marriage. That prenup doesn't cover you stealing my youth. The air grew thick with unspoken accusations and rising animosity. My head reeled. Half of everything? The house had about $300,000 in equity, mostly from my down payment and mortgage payments. My retirement account, built over years of consistent contributions, held close to $400,000. Investments, around $150,000. We were talking about close to $1 million in assets, the vast majority of which I had earned and saved. She hadn't contributed significantly financially, having inconsistent employment throughout our marriage. The prenup was specifically designed to protect these assets and prevent spousal support in a situation exactly like this, a no-fault divorce, where neither party had committed egregious acts. We had signed that prenup willingly. Her parents had actually encouraged it, both coming from complex financial backgrounds. Sophia had her own independent lawyer, Ms. Thorne, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had reviewed every clause with her. There had been no pressure, no coercion. It was a practical agreement between two people starting a life together, acknowledging their separate assets and planning maturely for a potential, albeit unlikely, end. Or so I thought. Now the woman who had calmly signed that document across the table from me was claiming it was null and void, not legally but morally, because I had somehow stolen her youth and potential by, what, marrying her and then falling out of love? The days that followed were a blur of tense silence at home and frantic phone calls for me. I reached out to a lawyer recommended by a colleague, Mr. Sterling. He was older, calm, with kind eyes but a steel backbone when it came to legal matters. Sat in his office, the prenup spread out between us and recounted the conversation with Sophia. He listened patiently, occasionally nodding. Mr. Miller, he said, his voice steady, the purpose of a prenuptial agreement is precisely this, to provide clarity and protect assets in the event of divorce. Assuming it was executed correctly, full disclosure, independent counsel, no duress, which you say it was, it is a legally binding contract that the court will uphold. But she says I wasted her time, her youth, I said, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The emotional weight of her accusations was immense. That's an emotional argument, Ethan, not a legal one, Mr. Sterling replied. While the court acknowledges the emotional impact of divorce, asset division, is generally based on legal principles, primarily community property laws where applicable, or, in your case, the terms of your valid prenuptial agreement. Her feelings, while understandable, do not legally entitle her to your separate property or assets you accumulated according to the prenup's terms. He was right, of course. Legally, I was on solid ground. Morally, that's where Sophia was trying, to bury me. She didn't just want money. She wanted to inflict pain, to make me pay for the crime of no longer loving her. She wanted revenge. The gloves came off almost immediately after lawyers were formally involved. Ms. Thorne, Sophia's lawyer, from 6 years ago, was back, and she was aggressive. Her initial filing completely ignored the prenup, listing Sophia's demands for half of everything, along with a hefty sum for spousal support, citing Sophia's limited earning capacity during the marriage and the nebulous concept of reimbursement for contributions to the marriage. It was infuriating. Every communication from Ms. Thorne felt like a personal attack, laced with accusations that mirrored Sophia's, emotional manipulation, abandonment, financial disparity deliberately created by me. They weren't just fighting for assets. They were fighting to paint me as the villain. The emotional toll was immense. The house, once our shared sanctuary, became a battleground of cold shoulders and pointed glares before I eventually moved into a temporary apartment. The life I had carefully built felt like it was being systematically dismantled, not just through the legal process, but through Sophia's deliberate actions to tarnish my name. She started with mutual friends, subtle comments at first, then increasingly overt accusations. Ethan just decided he didn't want me anymore after I gave him my best years. He pulled the rug out from under me. The narrative spread like wildfire. Some friends, confused and caught in the middle, distanced themselves. Others, particularly those closer to Sophia, turned hostile. I saw passive-aggressive posts on social media, veiled references to heartless men and discarded wives, clearly aimed at me. It was a public smear campaign designed to isolate me and garner sympathy for her cause. Then came the legal escalation. Ms. Thorne wasn't just ignoring the prenup, she was actively challenging it on spurious grounds. Minor technicalities were blown out of proportion. They alleged I hadn't provided full financial disclosure before signing, easily disproven with 6-year-old documents. They claimed Sophia was under duress, a laughable assertion given she had her own lawyer and ample time. It was clear they were trying to make the divorce as expensive and painful as possible, hoping I would crack under the pressure and offer a settlement far exceeding the prenup's terms, just to make it stop. They even tried to argue the lost potential angle in legal correspondence. Ms. Thorne argued that Sophia's career trajectory was stunted by the marriage, implying I somehow held her back. This was particularly galling. I had always encouraged Sophia's endeavors, offered financial support for courses she wanted to take, and never once suggested she prioritize the home over her career. Her inconsistent work history was her own struggle, not something I had imposed. But in Sophia's narrative, and the one Ms. Thorne was pushing, it was all my fault, another reason I owed her. My stress levels soared. Sleep became a luxury. My focus at work suffered. Mr. Sterling, bless him, remained a beacon of calm in the storm. "This is a common tactic, Ethan," he explained during one particularly frustrating meeting. "Make the other side miserable, drain their resources, hope they give in. But we have the prenup. It's strong. We will counter every claim, provide the evidence, and the court will see through these maneuvers." He advised me to document everything. Save every message, every social media post, every email from Sophia or her lawyer that felt harassing or part of the smear campaign. It felt dirty, cataloging the ways the woman I married was trying to destroy me. But it was necessary. Mediation was a disaster. We sat in separate rooms, communicating only through our lawyers. Sophia's demands were astronomical, still insisting on half, framing it as compensation for her stolen years. Ms. Thorne delivered Sophia's emotional arguments with a cold, legalistic tone that made them sound almost predatory. Mr. Sterling calmly presented the prenup, section by section, outlining what Sophia was legally entitled to, basically just her separate property brought into the marriage, which was minimal, and a fair division of the modest joint account. "Ms. Thorne, while we understand your client's emotional distress," Mr. Sterling said, his voice measured, "the prenuptial agreement clearly dictates the division of assets. It was signed willingly with independent counsel. Her current feelings do not invalidate a legally binding contract," Ms. Thorne countered, her voice sharp. "Mr. Sterling, we argue that the very foundation of this marriage was built on a misrepresentation. Mr. Miller's implied promise of a lifelong partnership, which he unilaterally decided to terminate after benefiting from Ms. Miller's youthful years and support. The prenup, while signed, cannot foresee or cover this kind of emotional abandonment and its impact on her future earning capacity. It was circular, frustrating, and utterly without legal merit regarding asset division under the prenup, but it showed the narrative they were committed to. The mediator, a weary-looking woman who had clearly seen it all, gently guided them back to the legal realities, but Sophia refused to budge from her demands. Mediation failed. We were heading for a court hearing. As the court date loomed, Ms. Thorne's tactics became more desperate. They filed motions claiming I was hiding assets, demanding exhaustive documentation of every penny I had earned or spent in the last decade. It was a fishing expedition, designed to bury me in paperwork and legal fees. My life became a cycle of working, meeting with Mr. Sterling, and gathering documents. But as Sophia pushed harder for her version of revenge, financial ruin, and public humiliation for me, the universe, or perhaps just the cold, hard reality, of legal due process started to deliver its own form of karma. The discovery Mr. Sterling, anticipating their claims of hidden assets, had initiated a thorough but standard financial discovery process on Sophia as well. Her demands for half of everything, while contributing little, raised questions. What had she been doing with the money she did earn? Was she truly as financially precarious as she claimed? The discovery process is a two-way street, and that street led us to something unexpected. Bank statements from an account Sophia had maintained separately. One we never really discussed. It wasn't hidden, not technically, but it wasn't our joint account. These statements, going back several years, showed consistent, albeit small, deposits from her freelance work, more than she had often indicated she was earning. More importantly, they showed consistent transfers. Transfers not into savings, or towards bills, but into a separate investment account under her name only. This account wasn't huge, nothing compared to my retirement fund, maybe $30,000 or so. But its existence, and the regular transfers she had never mentioned, directly contradicted her narrative of being financially dependent and solely focused on our shared life to the detriment of her own finances. It showed she was capable of saving and investing, and had been doing so privately, while simultaneously portraying herself as someone who had sacrificed everything and was left with nothing. Then came the even more significant discovery. Digging deeper, prompted by the timing of some of these transfers and cross-referencing with emails requested during discovery, Mr. Sterling's team found communication threads between Sophia and a former colleague in another state. These emails, going back over a year, detailed Sophia's plans to potentially relocate, discussing job opportunities in her field that seemed much more stable and lucrative than the on-again, off-again work she did locally. They weren't concrete job offers, but active, serious inquiries and networking efforts. This wasn't illegal, of course. She was allowed to explore job options. But combined with the hidden investment account, it painted a very different picture than the one she was presenting in court filings and to our social circle. She wasn't just a victim suddenly discarded and left with nothing. She was someone who had quietly been building a small financial cushion and exploring her options outside the marriage, even while we were in therapy and I was trying to mend things. This evidence was powerful, not just legally, but in shattering the carefully constructed narrative of innocent victimhood she had built. It didn't invalidate the prenup, but it severely undermined her emotional conned and left with nothing claims, portraying her instead as someone who was perhaps already planning for a future independent of me and was now simply trying to leverage my assets to fund it more generously. The prenup's ironclad nature is reaffirmed. Court hearing was brief and businesslike. Ms. Thorne again attempted to introduce the emotional arguments, painting a picture of a young woman's dashed dreams and a husband's calculated abandonment. She touched upon the lost potential and the perceived unfairness of the prenup given the passage of time. Mr. Sterling was clinical in his response. He presented the prenup, highlighting its clear terms, the fact that Sophia had independent legal counsel, and that full disclosure had occurred. He systematically dismantled Ms. Thorne's arguments, not by engaging with the emotional narrative, but by focusing strictly on contract law. Then came the presentation of the evidence from discovery, the separate investment account, the emails exploring out-of-state job opportunities. Mr. Sterling didn't use them to attack Sophia's character unnecessarily, but to demonstrate that she was not, in fact, left with nothing and that she had been actively planning for her own financial future, contradicting the core of her dependent victim argument. The judge listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Mr. Sterling finished, he didn't even need a lengthy deliberation. "Ms. Thorne," the judge said, his voice firm. "While the court acknowledges that divorce is an emotionally difficult process for all parties involved, our purview in this matter is to interpret and apply the law as it pertains to the division of marital assets and debts. A valid prenuptial agreement is a legally binding contract. Based on the evidence presented, the terms of the agreement, proof of independent legal counsel for Ms. Miller at the time of signing, and the lack of compelling evidence of duress or fraudulent inducement regarding the agreement itself, the court finds the prenuptial agreement to be valid and enforceable." He continued, "The arguments presented regarding wasted youth or emotional con do not legally invalidate the terms of this contract concerning asset division. Furthermore, the financial documentation submitted during discovery indicates that Ms. Miller maintained separate savings and actively explored independent financial opportunities, which contradicts the claim of being left entirely without means due to the marriage ending." The judgment was unequivocal. The prenup stood. Assets would be divided strictly according to its terms. There would be no spousal support. Sophia would receive only her separate property as defined by the agreement, which amounted to little, more than her personal belongings and the small sum in the separate investment account, $30,000. I watched Sophia's face as the judge spoke. The fury was still there, but now mixed with disbelief and a dawning realization that her plan had failed. The revenge she sought, the financial crippling she envisioned for me, was not going to happen. The legal karma was swift and absolute. She had gambled on the court siding with her emotional narrative over a binding legal contract, and she lost spectacularly. Her aggressive tactics, the baseless accusations, the attempts to make my life miserable, they hadn't swayed the judge. If anything, the revelation of her own quiet financial planning likely undermined her credibility. The divorce was finalized shortly after, adhering precisely to the judge's ruling. The house remained mine. My retirement and investments were protected. The financial future I had worked hard for was secure, as the prenup had intended. Sophia received what the law, as defined by the contract we both willingly signed, said she should receive. It wasn't half of my wealth. It was a fraction. The aftermath wasn't triumphant, though. There was a hollow victory. The emotional scars from the bitter legal battle and Sophia's attempts to ruin my reputation wouldn't heal quickly. The shared history we had, the good memories, were now tainted by the acrimony of the end. I heard through the grapevine that her public narrative of victimhood started to unravel somewhat after the judgment. When the legal facts came out, some of the friends who had sided with her began to question her story. The friend who had been her biggest supporter, Jessica, reportedly had a falling out with her after realizing the extent of Sophia's demands and the existence of her separate savings. The social karma, while less absolute than the legal, was there too. Her attempt to weaponize public opinion had a shelf life once the truth, or at least the legally adjudicated truth, became known. I don't know what Sophia is doing now. I changed my number and haven't kept tabs. I imagine she's had to adjust her expectations, perhaps pursue those job opportunities in the other states she was researching. Maybe she's learned that emotional appeals, no matter how strongly felt, don't override legal agreements, and that attempting revenge can have unintended consequences. I reflect on it sometimes. Falling out of love is a quiet tragedy. It carries guilt, regret, and pain for everyone involved. But does it warrant financial ruin for the person whose feelings changed? Does it negate a contract designed for this very scenario? From my perspective, upholding the prenup wasn't about cruelty or punishment. It was about respecting a legal agreement we both entered into freely. It was about preventing a financial outcome that felt fundamentally unfair, based on demands that went far beyond, compensating for perceived emotional harms and into the realm of financial retribution. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie, and I tried to navigate the end of our marriage with as much integrity as I could muster under immense pressure. The outcome, dictated by the law and the contract, feels less like my victory and more like the legal system upholding the principles of agreement and responsibility. It's a difficult end to a chapter of my life, but standing by the prenup felt like the only defensible position in the face of demands that seemed driven by resentment rather than fairness. I'm slowly rebuilding, moving forward, hopefully towards a future built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, and perhaps a clearer understanding of how fragile even the strongest beginnings can be.